Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Mr. K is Wrong, where I debunk the Facebook posts of a right wing goofball named Mr. K, who I used to know back in my high school days. And this time, you might think, well, why are you doing an episode today? Because it's Christmas. Yesterday was Christmas Eve. Shouldn't you be taking a break? Well, evil opinions do not take a break, and I have a post that he made on Facebook that I consider to be at least a little bit on the evil side because it is Islamophobic. And, he should have been trying to spread a little bit of holiday cheer on Christmas Eve, but instead he had to spread a little bit of fear mongering and bigotry. So I'm going to debunk a right wing meme posted by a purported Christian on Christmas Eve showing Muslims on a street bowing in prayer. And here's what the text says, and I want to address that. All right, so there are hypocrisies involved, of course, but anyway, the meme depicts the Muslims bowing in prayer on a street, and it says, while British police hunt down white Christian preachers to stop them from speaking on the streets, Muslims can do what they want. Then the meme quotes Elon Musk for some reason, and Elon said, civil war in Britain is inevitable, just a question of when, end quote. And it goes on, fun fact, Muslims don't pray in the streets of Iran or Saudi Arabia or other Muslim countries. It is illegal and considered rude because it disturbs others. They only pray in the streets of countries they are conquering as a dominant strategy. End quote. So a little bit of fear mongering there. He could have spread a message of peace, love, and understanding and all that kind of stuff, but he didn't. So, point number one regarding this meme, the image or video itself is misleading or misattributed. So, many viral clips of Muslims praying in the street that circulate in memes or on platforms like Twitter or X, if you want to call it that, they aren't what they're claimed to be. Some widely shared clips that purport to show Muslims praying in London or Britain have been proven to be filmed elsewhere. For example, a clip claimed to be London was actually from Istanbul, Turkey, or Turkey as they call it now. Uh, I'm still in the habit of calling it Turkey, but a similar video circulated with claims it showed Muslims blocking roads in the UK, but it was actually from Paris in 2017 during a protest. And other clips that have been shared were from 2020 and the coronavirus lockdown periods, and they were wrongly portrayed as recent or evidence of lawlessness. So the core visual claim in the meme is likely decontextualized or from the wrong location and time, not evidence of some coordinated, intentional street praying takeover in Britain. Point number two, public prayer is not illegal in the UK, but disruption can be regulated. So the meme claims Muslims can do what they want while Christian preachers are allegedly hunted down, and that's false framing. Freedom of religion is a protected right in the UK under the Human Rights Act and the European Convention on Human Rights, which includes the right to manifest religious practices publicly, subject to limits that prevent harm or disorder. So, people from any faith, including Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, or Jews, can hold public religious activities so long as they don't block traffic, break public order laws, or incite hatred. And police intervene when public safety is at risk, not based on religion, or at least that's how it's supposed to be. And yes, some Christian street preachers have been arrested or fined in the UK, but not just for being Christian, rather for breach of peace, hate speech, or threatening behavior, according to UK laws. and the legal system regulates behavior that it views causes public disruption or violates anti discrimination laws regardless of faith. Now, of course, on an individual case by case basis, maybe you might question some of the arrests that occur and maybe even are valid in your opinion or your critique. But the meme obviously is not specific in its critique. It's more like a bumper sticker slogan. So you don't really even know exactly what is being claimed in the meme, which is something that works perfectly in favor of right wing movements, right? The less specific you are, the better. The more vague, the more chaotic your argument, the more it will just appeal to people who don't really care to hear elaborations in the first place. Because, the more you think about something, the more that, hey, maybe it could be debunked in some way. Maybe it's only a half truth. Maybe it's totally made up. But if it's a vague, generalized claim, well, it's actually harder to debunk that in the first place. So that's why memes like this are able to perpetuate so easily. And it's a myth that Muslim countries ban public prayer in streets altogether. The meme claims that Muslims don't pray in the streets of Iran or Saudi Arabia, and that's a simplification of reality. In many Muslim majority countries, mosques and prayer spaces are abundant and often large, as you might imagine, so crowds don't need to overflow into streets on regular days. So, during occasions like major religious events, it's not unusual for worshippers to use open spaces or courtyards because the number attending outstrips indoor capacity, and these practices are often organized and permitted locally. Street praying isn't blanket illegal everywhere in the Muslim world. Enforcement varies depending on local law and context. So the claim that public prayer is universally banned in Muslim countries is inaccurate. And as much as I kind of hate to engage in some whataboutism here, you know that some of these Christians would be in favor of banning Muslim prayer altogether, which is why they are advancing these memes in the first place. The crowd that wants religious freedoms for Christians would not want them for Muslims in these countries. And interpretation is a significant thing here. Public prayer isn't necessarily a dominant strategy. I guess it depends on how you look at it, though. The meme's assertion that Muslims pray in the street only in countries they are conquering as a dominant strategy is I, I wouldn't say it's baseless because religions do try to spread. That's what that's one of the things they're famous for doing. So I wouldn't say it's baseless, but it is a classic example of a hostile narrative used to frame ordinary religious practice as threats. And it does become a little bit more complicated as an issue because as an atheist, I do view religion as potentially dangerous. But there is an irony here because this meme is being perpetuated by far right ideologues who are themselves a threat. And even if they're not overtly religious, because you can technically have some secular or even atheistic right wingers, but even if they're not overtly religious, they still have dangerous ideologies that they are trying to impose on the population. And they're using the fear of one group to justify, you know, imposing potentially deadly policies on the entire country. It's scapegoating, using that scapegoat to perpetuate fear and to justify using authoritarian power to implement a sort of theocratic worldview on a given population. And public prayer, especially, the Friday prayer or during festivals, can draw crowds that might overflow into public spaces. And this is due to logistics, not necessarily a strategic conquest or anything like that. So, fact checking by multiple organizations has repeatedly shown claims framing such practices as territorial takeover as propaganda tactics rather than evidential truths. So, in short, public prayer, whether for Muslims, Christians, or others, is typically more about religious practice, not a geopolitical strategy. Although, of course, it can be used that way, it can be exploited in that way. So, a little bit of nuance is required. And again, the idea that Muslims are necessarily so much scarier than Christians or whatever is it's definitely on the dubious side, because right now in the United States there are, Christian theocrats who want to impose all sorts of, I guess, potentially dangerous ideas on the public. And you have these also tied into some sometimes neo-Nazi or clan-like ideologies, and it's a recipe for danger, because of course you can even look at a group that's obviously dangerous and obviously against human rights, like the Taliban in Afghanistan. But imagine if the Taliban also had racist hatred against, black people or whatever added into the mix. Well, that makes the other, the right wing Christian ideology even more dangerous potentially, because you have some Taliban esque ideas added into some racist ideas. So it's actually potentially more dangerous to have a what they call a Christian nationalist worldview that obviously is against LGBTQ people and wants to, you know, in some cases go after atheists or whatever. The potential for disaster is truly evident in Christian nationalism. So the idea that is Islamic people are the only ones that we ever would need to be afraid of, it's just ludicrous in the greater context of, and of course Donald Trump is right now threatening Venezuela, he's threatened to invade Canada, he's threatening Mexico, all these different countries, in addition to, funding the extremist activity that is going on with Israel against the Palestinians, the mass slaughter there, the hundreds of thousands of people being killed, deliberate starvation applied as a wartime strategy, as they would call it. Well, they're also, of course, removing people from the land and planning to take it over, turn it into some disgusting tourist resorts that people could visit and, I guess, relax over all the piles of the dead bodies that that are going to inevitably be a part of that history. I mean, they already are, of course, but it's just going to get worse and worse. So we're supposed to look at that scenario and somehow find that to not be as vulgar as Muslims just engaged in prayer in a public place. So the meme also quotes Elon Musk, and of course, Elon Musk has been outed as a neo-fascist as well. I mean, he even did the Sieg Heil, famously doing that twice during the inauguration ceremony. And of course, he's been brandishing a lot of white nationalist talking points on X or Twitter. He's been excreting those things on X. And the meme invokes a quote attributed to Elon Musk about civil war in Britain. And Elon Musk did publicly say civil war in Britain is inevitable in response to a video of unrest and riots, and that remark was widely criticized by UK government officials as irresponsible and unjustified. British officials explicitly rejected Musk's framing, arguing that such rhetoric fuels fear and division rather than calm or solutions. And of course, that is what the right wingers really like to do. They like the idea of people being fearful so they can come in and ride that wave of fear into power. That's how Mussolini did it, that's how Adolf Hitler did it. It's just a winning strategy for these types, although the fascists, they end up staying in power typically for a shorter amount of time simply because they declare war against too many different types of people. This is an interesting point that people don't really talk about often enough. Is that that's one of the reasons that fascism ultimately fails, because it's simply against too many different groups. I mean, obviously, it's bad enough to be against you know practically any group you could think of, and that is a potential danger. But you can still get away with it more easily if you're just going after one or two groups here and there. But if you're basically declaring war against all these different countries, all these different types of people, and you have all sorts of political fracturing that results from that instability, you're basically in a constant war. Well, that's eventually going to lead to some sort of not only internal division but outright conflict, right? So that's one of the reasons why fascism will ultimately fail one way or the other. Either it'll collapse under its own weight, or more likely it will end up going to the point where it's just totally dysfunctional, because it's constantly in literal war with other places, like the World War, of course, World War II, where Hitler ended up famously offing himself in an underground bunker. And it's fear of Muslims in this case, but it could be fear of any number of different groups of people. The fear of immigrants trying to create a perfect white nationalist Christian society, or however you want to describe it. That's ultimately going to be doomed to catastrophic failure. We're already seeing a brain drain, barring people from entering who are educated and who could fill in jobs as doctors and such, doing scientific research. So, the education system is floundering right now. People don't want to come in to be not only immigrants but tourists either, and that's another problem. So, well, I think you get the idea of why this meme is just rotten. Musk's he's had a lot of removal of bans on far right figures on X, which has contributed to increased far right content and disinformation on the platform. Not just misinformation, which is basically a person misunderstanding something, but deliberate disinformation. That's what Twitter or X has become known for. They're just excreting a bunch of nonsense, a bunch of waste onto the platform. And unfortunately, some people still will see that as being accurate information. So while you can factually quote Musk's words, his prediction isn't some authoritative analysis. It's part of a broader pattern of provocative, often far right aligned commentary that many journalists and politicians have criticized, and which, frankly, is just disgusting overall. So, the big picture why this meme spreads: the meme combines several tactics common in online political misinformation or disinformation. It decontextualizes videos and images to make them seem current and threatening. There are false comparisons between how different religions are treated legally. It's using fearful language about demographic change, very common in far right circles, and it's linked with figures like Elon Musk, whose recent rhetoric has been divisive and sometimes aligned with anti immigrant or far right talking points. So these are all designed to appeal to emotions like fear and resentment, not to offer accurate understanding of legal rights or everyday religious practices. And one of the great ironies here is that Donald Trump is actually, of course, closely allied with Saudi Arabia, which is an Islamic theocratic dictatorship. So the idea that a few people praying in a street somewhere is going to be more dangerous than Donald Trump's own allegiance to Saudi Arabia is laughable. And of course, the organizations like the Taliban or ISIS or whatever are ironically far right organizations in their own right. So, the idea that they're uh, somehow anti-Islamic in posting memes like this is ridiculous because these ideologies are all actually kind of similar. They're all bashing multiculturalism. They're all far right in their scope and their influence. They will ultimately end up appealing to different groups, of course, but the ultimate aim is the same, to have one group declared as superior to others and to reject different types of people and to say that our ideology is pure and all these other groups are inferior. So the Islamic groups end up looking similar to the Christian nationalist groups. It's just that they happen to have some different beliefs, like they will claim to worship a god with a different name or something like that. Like I support Jesus, even though these right wingers, they certainly will not embody the teachings of Jesus, who was actually in favor of immigration, accepting immigrants as if they were your neighbors or your family or something like that. The Bible also has Jesus depicted as not being so keen on rich people. The quote is that a wealthy person has no greater chance of getting into heaven than he does passing through, or than a camel does passing through the eye of a needle, or something like that. I kind of butchered that, but I'm just kind of riffing right now, and basically I could end this right now just by saying that the meme sucks.